Hello. In this video we're going to talk about how to write what are called accessor and mutator methods. Accessor are sometimes called get methods. Mutators are sometimes called set methods. To properly illustrate this, we're going to use two files here. The first class is called fraction runner, which you can see right here. Just scroll up one, fraction runner. And we're going to use this to test our class that we have in this called fraction. Now I've already written fraction. Fraction consists of a couple fields, which are sometimes called instance variables. It also consists of two constructors, as well as some instance methods, which we're not too concerned with for the sake of this video. So if we take a look just to start with, we see that we have two fields, and get and set methods are particularly concerned with accessing, modifying fields for instances of a class. So right now we see that the modifier for both of these is public, and we see here the word public. A nice point just to remind ourselves is that if the word public isn't there, if there's no modifier in other words, the default is public. But I really like to encourage for beginning programmers to always write that in, because by writing in these things it helps to internalize them in your work. So let's go to fraction runner. So you'll notice here I have a little program here, and let's just walk through it really quickly. We have a scanner class. You'll notice that I've declared a JPanel object for a second, and we'll come back to that in a second. This is something just to illustrate a point really quickly, and then I'll erase it. But we create two instances of the fraction. We have this variable called temp, which we don't do anything with yet. And then we take an input for the numerator of the fraction, we take an input for the denominator of the fraction, and then we print it out. So the point I want to make just up here with this JPanel is that get and set methods are a common convention in all Java classes. So if I write down my instance of JPanel P and put a dot, and I type in the word get methods, there's lots and lots and lots and lots of them. Get methods are used to get some piece of information about that object. Likewise, if I want to set a field, if I go p.set, you'll notice there is a whole bunch of set methods. Set methods are used to set some feature of that instance. So what we want to do is when we write our own classes, we want to model them with similar type of structure in case we share our program with someone else. So let's get rid of this now. So currently if I run this program, this is what it does. I run this, and I have to move this up, and it says input the numerator for the fraction, so let's put 3, the denominator 6, and I hit enter and it says the fraction is 3 over 6. Perfect. Students will inevitably say this to me, because we always talk about problems with programs and logic errors, that if I run this, the student will say, well, why don't you input 1? Oh, pardon me, I'm in the code there. Let's go down here. Mr. Misk, you input 1 and then put a 0. And then it says the fraction is 1 over 0, and inevitably a student will say, you can't have a denominator of 0. So we talk about fixes for that, and one of the fixes for this is to simply do this. We take our f1 denominator, and instead of inputting directly into it, we put a temp, and then we make an if statement. We say if temp is not equal to 0, we set f1 dot denominator equal to temp. Else we can say something like invalid. Now there's lots of ways to deal with this. I'm not too concerned about how we deal with this invalid information, but the point is that if you were a programmer and you were dealing with your code, you'd want to deal with that odd case to make sure it didn't affect your programming. So currently the way this works now, if I run this, we'll see it says input the numerator, and I can put a 1 for my fraction object f1, and I can put a 0, and it actually tells you it's invalid and won't change it. Right now, every fraction object that's created, so in our case we have two fraction objects, fraction f1 is going to have a field called numerator and is going to have a field called denominator. Fraction f2 is going to have a field called numerator and going to have a field called denominator. How I can distinguish between them is before accessing that variable, is using the implied object, or the instance that I'm interested in. So in this case, if I do f1.numerator, I'm accessing the numerator for object f1. But here's the thing. When you write a class, it's good practice to encapsulate a class. And what encapsulation means is taking your fields and making them private, meaning that people cannot access them if the code is written in a different class. So if I change the words there to private, and again, private is a different type of modifier, which means that you cannot access these fields outside of this class. If we go back to our fraction runner now, we're going to see some errors pop up right here. And you see it says the field fraction.num is not visible. That's because I've made it private. So this is called encapsulation. You're protecting the fields by restricting who can access them. But then the next question comes, how do I actually get at them? So we're going to start by writing set methods. To get at these fields, remember, if it's private, we can access them if we're inside the class. So if I come down here, I'm going to write my set methods. And I typically like to group them all together. So to write set methods, we write an instance method, public. And since we're setting a value, we don't need to return anything, void. And we always start with set, and we're going to write this as set numerator. It's going to take an integer value of a. And all we do is we take numerator equal to a, and that's it. And then I go public, void, and I also have to set the denominator, and I'm going to make an integer b, or we could call this a again, it doesn't matter. And we say the denominator is equal to a. We're done. We've just written our set methods. We have a little error here. Public void set denominator. Oh, I've caught my error down here. I've already written this method before, so let's take that out. I can't duplicate it. All right, let's continue. So I've written my two set methods. So now if I go back to here, I can't actually directly modify numerator. So what I'm going to do now is the following. I'm going to use that temp variable. And I'm going to say temp is equal to s.nextInt. And then I'm going to do f1.set numerator to temp. So what this does is this invokes the method set numerator, passing as an argument temp, and what that will do is set the numerator to whatever value temp is. Now, I can do the same thing down here for the denominator. So instead of doing this, what I could do is I take a temp variable and I say if the temp is not equal to 0, I can do f1.set denominator, and we're going to set the denominator to temp, which works perfectly fine. Now here's one of the beauties of set methods. The beauty of a set method is that, let's say I had to take an input 100 times for the denominator for whatever reason. And again, remember, we're talking about a fraction class. In this case, this is used to teach people about this. It's not necessarily the most practical class in the world. But let's imagine you had to take 100 inputs. You'd have to write this chunk of code 100 times. So a better approach here is let's remove this logic altogether, and let's just set it regardless. So f1.set denominator, and we're going to pass it the temp. And now if I go to my fraction class, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the logic right in here. If a is not equal to 0, we set it. Else, if we wanted to, we could print out denominator not changed, right? You could deal with this in a whole variety of ways. The principle that we really want to take away from this is that you write your error checking code right inside the set method. And that means anyone that uses this class, you could give it to 100 people, they have the same consistent error checking in there. So we've dealt with two of the errors up here, and now let's deal with the third. The third is I'm trying to access f1.numerator and f1.denominator there. But again, numerator and denominator are now private fields, meaning I can't access them unless I'm in fraction. So to solve that problem, I write what are called get methods. And get methods are written public. And in this case, we're trying to get an integer, so it's going to return an int. We're going to call this get denominator. And all we do is return denominator. Then we go public int, get numerator, and we return the numerator. And that's all there is to get and set methods. They're simple methods, but they're very important in terms of programming as you move forward because they are used with all pre-built classes in Java. And when you're designing something in Java, it's really important that as a programmer you follow this convention for a variety of reasons. So now, just to finalize this program, instead of saying f1.num, I do f1.getNum. Instead of saying f1.denominator, I say f1.getDenominator. Now, if everything has gone to plan, I should be able to run this. And it asks me for my numerator, let's say 9, my denominator 10, and there's no change in the actual functionality of the program. But what we've done now is we have encapsulated the fraction class. And encapsulation is when we make all the fields private and we write accessor, get methods, and mutator, set methods for the class. I hope that helped.